Who were the mysterious barbarian tribe teased in Breath of the Wild? What secrets lie behind the constructs? And what was the purpose of the shrines in Tears of the Kingdom? Today, we're diving into 7 hidden lore secrets revealed in Masterworks, the Japan-exclusive book that dropped in 2024. And just knowing the contents of this book improves the lore dropped in Age of Imprisonment, the new game released on November 6th, 2025. If you're curious about any of these mysteries or just want to dive deeper into the lore of Tears of the Kingdom, you won't want to miss this. So go grab yourself a snack, drop a like to help this video reach more Zelda fans, and remember, it's dangerous to go alone. So subscribe and we'll uncover the secrets of Hyrule together. We're starting out our list talking about the 5 core abilities once you get given the Ultra Hand from the Sage of Light Rauru. This arm grants us the ability to phase through solid matter in the form of Ascend, time reversal in the ability Recall, the ability to combine items found in both the overworld and in your inventory to existing weaponry or shields in Fuse, and of course the ability to combine a number of items together in order to create almost anything conceivable in Ultra Hand. Later on in the game, you also travel to the depths, a mysterious mirror world as it were, deep under the surface of Hyrule. Down in these depths are statues, which lead us directly to the first of 5 mines found in the deep dark caverns of the underworld, the central mining facility, where we are graciously given a 5th ability by an odd machine, known as a construct, which we will be talking about later on. This 5th ability is called Auto Build, and it takes a blueprint of the last built item using Ultra Hand, or alternatively a pre-made blueprint, and allows the user to rapidly build the item on the blueprint. However, one of these things decidedly is not like the others in terms of its strength, and is a lot more like a quality of life improvement for the gameplay rather than anything else at all. But are there lore implications to this particular skill? Well, according to Masterworks, the book that released shortly after Tears of the Kingdom released solely in Japan, and translated by the fabulous Livy X Bobby X, the answer here is, in fact, yes. And it may even explain why it wasn't preloaded as an ability on Rauru's arm to begin with. Magic in the Zonai tribe, it would seem, was not shared amongst every member of the Zonai tribe. As far back as the Godly era, it would seem as if different members of the Zonai would populate different areas of the world. Some in the depths, some in the sky, and some on the surface. This would mean that different tribe members may or may not have needed certain skills in order to best perform their daily routines. On the surface, for instance, Ultra Hand would have been an important aid with building, but in the depths, Ascend would have been more useful still, as ascending to the top of these pillars that the Zonai built would mean that they could save precious time in their mining operations. Not all abilities were shared across all Zonai members, and it's possible that individual Zonai possessed different abilities to these, such as Rauru with his light beam shown in the Gerudo Assault, a memory of Zelda's which shows Rauru, Sonia and Zelda working together to dissipate the effect of a Molduga attack set in motion by Ganondorf. Auto Build will have been therefore something that all Zonai could have learnt in theory, but not all Zonai would need it, and therefore the blueprints for the ability would have been given to a construct in the depths, for anyone who worked down in the mines on a regular basis enough in order to be more efficient with their job. For instance, building a wagon of sorts to transport large amounts of Zonite back to the mines. But if not all Zonai are born with every ability, then how does the selection process work on a grand scale for the entire tribe? And where did these abilities come from to begin with? Well, to answer the last question first as it were, a working theory is that the Zonai were granted their abilities by the goddess, so that they could be adequate guardians of the secret stones, according to the timeline of the wilds. A separate timeline to the overall Zelda timeline that takes place somewhere between the ancient Zonai era, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. It's stated that after the 3 goddesses created Hyrule, they also created the secret stones. They entrusted these stones to the Zonai, with the intention of the Zonai protecting the stones due to their immense power. It could have been considered that the skills afforded to protect these magical stones were granted to the Zonai in order to protect the stones. But that as a theory doesn't support the idea that each Zonai has its own use case applied when it comes to these skills. But it does coincide nicely with the fact that there does seem to be a connection between the goddess and the Zonai, especially considering the goddess statue placed within the Temple of Time in the sky. Their magic, however, was not limited to these 5 abilities. More powerful magic, it would seem, was possible should the Zonai need it. This magic could come in the form of runes or lettering that could be seen almost all over anything related to the Zonai within the games. The letters themselves, according to Masterworks, are not letters to write down information, but they appear to emerge when handling sophisticated secret techniques, and may well have been used to control certain powers. The best example of this is actually the upside down pyramid at the top of Ganondorf's ceiling chamber. You usually in game wouldn't be able to see this, as at this point the game forces a cutscene, and you just about see the tip of it. But with some handy modern technology, we can actually take the camera up here and see that the cornerstone, as it is officially termed within Masterworks, is actually covered in these letters. The cornerstone is likely a large part of the seal placed on Ganondorf, and as a bit of speculation on my part, may well be the reason for the seal lasting what could have been centuries or millennia. Masterworks does actually clarify this a little, explaining later on in the book that the current Hyrule Castle was indeed built upon the site of the seal, and that the new Hyrule Castle has a role in reinforcing the seal. And it's also stated that Hylians who have been instructed in the wisdom of the Zonai, and the next generation of Raru's children, constructed a mechanism to emit purified energy outside, almost like a gigantic miasma filter, leading to this rock covered in Zonai lettering being labelled as the cornerstone. This is touched upon a little in Age of Imprisonment. The information that the game gives us regarding the cornerstone happens relatively late into the game, so there is a timestamp on the screen now to skip directly past this point if you are not wanting late game spoilers. During the introductory cutscene to the mission Into the Fray, we're shown a few snippets of a flashback to Zelda, Minoru and Raru's time in the depths. During this, Raru is seen using his Master Hand ability to manipulate the rocks down in the depths. While these images are shown, Minoru describes it as a trap that has been set to the rest of the sages.
With a trap of sorts, a means by which Zelda and Raru will be able to wield even greater strength.
As once Ganondorf is lured into the site, Zelda and Raru's magic would be amplified. This is how this plays out in the battle, with Zelda and Raru both able to recharge their abilities over light faster. But in the cutscene itself, it's made plenty clear that Raru is the one who assembles the magic conduit in the roof of this area. This confirms that this site is indeed imbued with energy to help seal Ganondorf away. There are a couple of instances during the final moments of the game as well that seem to confirm this, but these are things I would rather not spoil. Not just yet. And that goes for you guys in the comments too. Please remember to keep things spoiler friendly for anyone that has skipped this portion. Those with exceptional abilities would be able to use this strength of magic, and that would be denoted by the markings on each Zonai's face. Just below their eyes, they're key to how powerful each creature is or was. Raru, with his supreme majesty as the King of Hyrule, has markings all around his eye, indicating that he was the strongest and had more abilities than the others. Trainees or young Zonai likely had one mark, similar to Zelda once she visits the Zonai version of Hyrule Castle for the first time, and Sonia has 4 drawn upon her skin, to show that she has a lot of power, but is still not as strong as her husband. This was likely how, along with the area that they would mainly work in, would gain their powers. If in social standing you had 2 markings under your eye, and you worked in the depths, you would likely be given the abilities of Ascend and Auto Build. But if you had 3 tiers and worked in the sky, you would likely be given Recall to reach the skies upon rocks that would be thrown down by other Zonai, Ultra Hand to navigate the lakes on the islands, and Fuse in order to help survive the bitter cold of the mountains via the use of fusing warmer fruits to clothing or shields. And that's Zonai Magic. A really fascinating topic that explains exactly how these abilities actually exist within the game.
across sky and earth. Light shall prevail over evil.
Probably the largest lore detail in Masterworks is the idea of the exorcism pilgrimage, and it's detailed very early on into the introduction of Age of Imprisonment. This pilgrimage sees Rauru and Sonia travel from area to area, purifying the areas of monsters via the use of Rauru's power over light. Masterworks explains, whether it was a thought or a deep-seated grudge, or even an inhuman entity that could well be the cause of monsters is unclear, but there was a quote-unquote evil presence that harmed the people of Earth. Rauru and Sonia, who had thought about creating a kingdom where all people could live in peace, travelled from each place one by one, where evil spirits and evil thoughts were strong, and places with many monsters in order to exorcise the evil. It is said that there were various things that existed that were called evil, and the people of Hyrule often struggled with containing such evil. As a result of this, Rauru and his new wife Sonia set out on a pilgrimage to sites with monster-heavy activity, cleaning the areas and sealing them so that monsters would be deterred from returning. Initially, Rauru took this upon himself, but found that with Sonia's help, it was much less demanding in terms of effort and time. Rauru's light power reduced the amount of monsters in the environment, likely due to him wiping them out with his powers over light. And Sonia's power would then make the flow of time so slow that monsters could no longer respawn. This power would be gathered into a stone, which would have enough power to continue repelling the forces of evil and therefore creating a safe space from said evil. After the exorcism, the stone would then have an outer layer built around it in order to protect it, and on the inside of the said outer layer would be an effigy, built by those that idolise Rauru, to the couple that had cleared the area of monsters. This area would then be filled with a strong green light, repelling any monsters from entering in total. These shrines were used after the fact of purification for various things. Some housed constructs or monsters placed deliberately inside of them in order to train future generations. Some had puzzles added to teach those who had access to Zonai Magic how to use their skills in the most effective manners. Upon leaving the shrines, the Zonai would then be able to choose to activate or deactivate the protection that the shrines would bestow, utilising their magic to do so. Upon activation, a seal would appear in front of the shrine door, sealing it away, whilst the blue and green magic would flow out of it in order to show that the shrine was active and doing its job as a protective measure against the measures of evil. And upon deactivation, the energy swirl would disappear, along with the seal, leaving just an opening for a Zonai or someone imbued with their magic to walk into.
I do not believe anyone else is as proficient at handling Zonai devices as the Maker constructs. That said, one should be careful around...
Before I start talking about the constructs, I want to, as per Masterworks, change the vernacular a little. This book never refers to the constructs by their English localization, but by their Japanese translated name, golems. And that, for the sake of ease and lack of confusion on my part, is what I'll refer to them as. These stone dolls, as the book describes them, were produced by the Zonai, and used Zonai energy as a power source. Many types of golems were built by the Zonai. Stewards, who had a task of keeping the lands clean and tidy. Cooking golems, who cooked for the entire Zonai tribe. Construction golems, who would build upon the Sky Islands, places to live and work. And hunters, who would catch the food for the cooks to eat. All of these were placed upon the Sky Islands in order to help the Zonai with their general existence, erasing all of the mundane jobs and tasks for the all-powerful race. These will have come in even more useful later on though, as the Zonai faced extinction. Rather than wasting what little resources they would have had in terms of energy, the golems would have handled the menial jobs, helping to elongate the lives of the remaining Zonai. Two other types of non-combative golems were also made. These focused on the mining operations within the depths. The operation was bigger than just the depths though, as the Zonai would gather Zonite from the underground lands, and then would transport them to the Sky Islands via Dragonhead Island. It would be on this island too that unused golems would be stored after having been transported from the depths, as seen in the cavities in the circular walls in this location. The golems would then be fused with Zonai energy here and then shipped off to various locations via the runway underneath these circular walls, and then placed onto wings, a Zonai item primarily used for floating in the air. Mining golems would mainly remain in the depths, conscripted to mine Zonite all day and all night. However, while it focused on the mining operation, refining golems were placed on the Sky Islands in order to refine said Zonite after it had been transferred through Dragonhead Island. These refining golems would take the Zonite and compact it down, similar to how carbon becomes a diamond through pressure, turning it into crystallized charges of pure Zonai energy. In addition to these more helpful forms of Zonai, there were also those in charge of the protection of the race. Block golems, for instance, would have been tasked with heavier lifting at work sites, while also being bodyguards for the other Zonai. The soldier golems that litter the world, and the shrines of course, were also used for protection. And it's even possible that some of these soldiers may have been used for training Zonai soldiers, or the practical uses of Zonai technology. There were also vessel golems, similar to Minoru's construct or even the new construct Link in Age of Imprisonment, as well as certain steward golems that were made for a very specific use, such as these ones here on the Bravery, Courage and Valor Islands. This was seen as a coming of age ceremony for the Zonai, where they would then, after completion, become a fully fledged member of the community, and therefore would obtain their magics. Although it isn't explained at all how these creatures managed to glide in between these rings to begin with. This ceremony would see the participant dive from a high altitude and need to pass through a series of rings within a determined time. Those who were successful would be given the glide outfit as evidence of being a full member of the Zonai. This rite of passage would test strength, agility and control, testing the Zonai's ability with their body as well as with technology, and it was likely a customary test to see what skills each Zonai had. If this sounds familiar at all, this is one of the lore details in Masterworks that borrows heavily from Skyward Sword. At the beginning of the game, you are tasked with finding your Loftwing, a giant bird who you then ride and win a race with. This race entitles the victor to spend time with Zelda atop the goddess statue, who Zelda will then give her custom stitched sailcloth to, before explaining that Link will take part in a diving ceremony, where he must land in a very specific place, in order to complete his initiation and become a trusted knight within Skyloft. This piece of lore alone indicates that ancient traditions from Skyward Sword were indeed passed down to the Zonai, showing a potential other option for Tears of the Kingdom's historical sections to have actually played out directly after the first game in the series. But that is truly another debate for another time. But we're going to wrap up talking exclusively about the Zonai and move on to talking more about some of the other clans within the game, most notably the Sheikah.
The history of the royal family of Hyrule is also the history of Calamity Ganon.
As a disclaimer here, the Sheikah aren't even mentioned in Age of Imprisonment, despite some characters looking like they would better suit the ancient ninja clan than the Zonai. But again, this tidbit about the Sheikah I thought was pretty interesting, as it does seem to imply some kind of connection between the Sheikah and the Zonai. To some degree, in game, the lore of the Sheikah has been vastly ignored. In Breath of the Wild, we had the new addition to the Sheikah clan, in the defective Sheikah tribe, who stand for the exact opposite of the Sheikah. But there's not much extra to add to the lore of the tribe that has now been around throughout the entirety of the current timeline. Masterworks changes this though, adding to their lore and suggesting a connection with the newer Zonai tribe. The book states that while they stand out, the history books have been filled with stories of a technologically advanced, influential people. Their prowess with technology was actually reportedly feared by the royal family, and much of their technology was therefore buried in order to keep it out of the wrong hands. An example given is that the royal family discovered some kind of energy source and used it to power their inventions. This power source produces a blue flame, which we see in Hateno village when we head to the research lab for the first time. We have to light these torches based on a blue flame, that run right the way up throughout the village and back up the giant hill that leads directly to the lab. When all of these are lit, the technology inside of the lab whirs to life, allowing Link to place his Sheikah slate inside and unlock the camera functionality. This is directly contrasted by the Zonai technologies that all draw power from Zonite. Rather than a blue energy that is emitted, the Zonai energy is marked in green and emits a glow. But it's said that both of these energies, blue for Sheikah, green for Zonai, are equal in terms of technological prowess. However, based on the timelines and how the Zonai would have come before the Sheikah, in this timeline at least, it would appear as if certain aspects of the Sheikah copied the Zonai. The biggest addition to the Sheikah lore through Masterworks though is this: the third eye that is sported by powerful members of the Zonai. As we see no Zonai other than Rauru, we can only take the words of Masterworks as gospel, in that the book indicates that all Zonai have this third eye, but it only opens when the holder of said third eye reaches Enlightenment and releases their special powers. Of course, this is a heavily religious reference, with Buddhists believing that through meditation, one can achieve enlightenment, and is often associated with visions, clairvoyance, the ability to reach chakras and auras, and out-of-body experiences. All of these are indicated at within the story of Tears of the Kingdom, firstly with Rauru's third eye opening during the Gerudo Assault's memory. When Sonia and Zelda make contact with Rauru, the eye springs open at the point where his magical ability is at its highest, and then later on again, when Rauru targets Ganondorf during the Imprisoning War, which sees him literally read chakra points on Ganondorf's body, allowing him to grab at the chest of Ganondorf and drive him into a sealed state using his magic. The Sheikah, of course, are symbolised by a teardrop falling from a widely opened eye, with 3 larger triangles representing eyelashes, and also the Triforce above it. This is likely a fusion of ideas between the Eye of Horus, an ancient Egyptian symbol that represents protection, healing and well-being, the Mind's Eye or the All-Seeing Eye, a symbol of connection between the mind, body and spirit, and of course the Triforce, with these 3 triangles at the top being shown to represent what the Sheikah have sacrificed so much for, in order to protect. The third eye and this particular symbol have a lot of closeness to one another, and the book goes on to state that this symbol was adopted by the Sheikah in honour of the Zonai tribe and their powers. It is also stated here that members of the Sheikah tribe would paint the third eye onto their foreheads, which in turn established this emblem as their own, having learned about the Zonai via the world's remaining ruins and legends. As another fun note, the developer wrote a note on the next book of the page that I think is worth adding into this section. In relation to the design of the Zonai and Rauru in particular, it reads: "In the initial stages of development, we brainstormed for the same old man type design as in previous works. But we took into account that the Zonai tribe prospered in the sky in the ancient past, with a godlike power that surpassed the ancient Sheikah, and were beings which struck awe in people on the surface, and that they're a tribe who flourished through magical prowess, as opposed to the ancient Sheikah, who were at the height of human technological power. So the concept was to create a creepy, alien-like feeling of a different species." By the way, with regards to the connection with the ancient Sheikah tribe, have you noticed the similarity between the Zonai tribe's third eye and the head design of the Sheikah tribe? No, perhaps it's better to say the reverse way around. A creepy alien feeling and a different species is an interesting way to describe the Zonai. I'd personally say that they were animalistic in a lot of ways, but addressing the fact that the Sheikah and Zonai are indeed linked, and the order of how they arrived into this timeline's Hyrule are interesting to say the least. This also infers that the Zonai were around long before the Sheikah, which, according to this timeline of these games, is true, at least. It should come as no surprise that the whole of Tears of the Kingdom is centred around one key event, the sealing or imprisoning war. And of course, Masterworks does its absolute best to flesh out some of the lore surrounding this. The book starts by asking a question we have all come across since the game's release. Why was the sealing site here, underneath Hyrule Castle, underground in the most northern part of central Hyrule? What made this place so special? Masterworks first talks about where Hyrule Castle should have been by logic, which should have been on the Great Plateau, and that it would have been a perfect location for the castle given the high cliffs and walls that the plateau afforded. This obvious upside meant that opposing armies would have struggled to enter the area, and the only real way in would have been from above. The Demon King didn't stop at the castle, and decided to attack all areas of the Great Plateau, forcing the Hyrulean or Zonai army to retreat north, with them gathering at Tananga Canyon, which later becomes the Forgotten Temple. This building was almost perfect as a war room of sorts, the large interior being suitable for gathering large numbers of troops inside, while it also housed something far more important for the war effort: the secret stones. It would be here that they would make their preparations to march and retake Hyrule Castle, inferring that the whole castle was indeed overtaken by Ganondorf and the Gerudo that marched with him. This they succeeded in, storming the castle and taking it by force, but it cost the Hyrulean army dearly, with thousands of lives being lost in the process. The battle over this castle would seesaw, and in order to minimise the amount of lives lost, Rauru plotted to divert the war into a more open, less populated area in the northernmost parts of central Hyrule. It was also supposed that this area within central Hyrule was listed as sacred ground, and would provide a legitimate advantage for Rauru and the others. How this area is deemed as sacred is another question entirely, as surely, if we're utilising the idea of this sacred land being where the statue of the goddess fell to within Skyward Sword, we would expect the most sacred land to in fact be on the Great Plateau. At first, I considered the placement of the Temple of Time in the skies, thinking perhaps that this is what makes this area sacred, but there's no connection with the temple being here. Whilst Hyrule Castle is located here, some distance away, despite both being within the borders of central Hyrule. But the next sentence within Masterworks clears this up entirely. In the present, the place where the Demon King has been sealed was called by the name Godly Era Ruins, and it's been identified that it was built more like a temple. For some Shinshoku, or Shinto priests, have suggested it may well be the Temple of Light of legend. The Temple of Light, in terms of lore for the Zelda series, is a really interesting term. It's something that's never actually surfaced inside of the Zelda series, despite being something rooted within the lore since Ocarina of Time. For those unaware, the Temple of Light was originally a location within the Temple of Time within the beta build of Ocarina of Time. It is said to be located at the very centre of the Sacred Realm, and is meant to be the last stronghold against Ganondorf's evil forces. It could be argued that this area here, the Chamber of the Sages, is one of the most innermost sanctums of the Temple of Light, and Link travels here every time he rescues one of the sages from their respective temples. It is also speculated that here is where the Triforce would have been stored, but likely due to time constraints, it and the Temple of Light were cut from the final versions of the game. If this is the case, and indeed this sealing site is intended to be the Temple of Light, then yes, the power here would help the team massively in terms of being able to seal or end the evil. and would be why this place was chosen as a position for the final battle. However, they would have to get Ganondorf there, and this was one of the other issues presented by the game. Why would he join them, isolated down here?
Your end is nigh, Ganondorf.
It's proposed that the Hyrule army evacuated to the north of central Hyrule, whereas the Demon King's armies went south. Upon heading north, they essentially provoked or lured Ganondorf into the innermost sanctum of the Temple of Light, and that provocation was aided supposedly by the Hyrulean army. Of course, the plan to lure Ganondorf here and separate him from his armies had one obvious limitation, which is of course if Ganondorf would actively follow their plan. However, when you look back at Ganondorf within Tears of the Kingdom, it is pretty clear that his hubris will always win out. And this was what Rauru was banking on, the Demon King's pride getting in his own way, leading him to follow what would be a very obvious enticement, and it likely would have been that Ganondorf even thought that he could win the battle despite being outnumbered and in a location that put him at a disadvantage. Of course, the history books dictate that Ganondorf was right, and Rauru and the others failed in their quest, even with the increased light energy in the area and the secret stones, leading to Rauru sacrificing himself, grabbing at Ganondorf's heart and sealing the two of them away for possible millennia to come.
The North Lomé Labyrinth is a harsh environment and an unsurprisingly labyrinthine structure.
In Breath of the Wild, adventuring through the Lomé Labyrinths will lead you to 3 ancient shrines, each with their own prize. Armour listed as Barbarian armour, made up of a helmet, armour and leg wraps. Each item has its own description, but each one makes it perfectly abundantly clear that these pieces of armour were worn by or favoured by an ancient warlike tribe from the Faron region. Each piece increases Link's attack, allowing him to channel his inner barbarian, and that is literally all of the information that we have surrounding the Barbarians. Over the course of 8 years, as a fan base, we've gone from believing that these Barbarians were indeed the Zonai, to now knowing that they were their own tribe. But what interaction or connection could the Barbarians have had to the Zonai? We know for instance that this area in Faron, the Zonai ruins, is actually likely where the Barbarians were thought to have lived, due to the descriptions on the armour specifying that they are from Faron, and it's just as likely that the Zonai used this area as a base of operation, likely being an area where varying tribes within the Zonai would house meetings on the surface. However, these two things are not concurrent, and there was likely a gap of a few thousand years between both the Zonai and the Barbarian tribes, and that both groups settled here due to the connection with the Spring of Courage. There is of course possibility that they were indeed concurrent, and that the Barbarians may have been a separated group of military extremists who opposed the Zonai tribe, or that these Barbarians could have been Zonai who refused to ascend to the heavens when they rose back into the air. A final suggestion from Masterworks is that these Barbarians were actually a religious group who worshipped the Zonai as the original species of the planet. But these are just theories put forward by the book, and it goes on to admit that it would be difficult to unravel these theories much further, seeing as the only evidence of the Barbarians is their clothing. Before we look at the Satori, Masterworks presents us with a new vernacular for bubble frogs. In Japan, bubble frogs are called Mayoi, which translates back to lost or bewildered, or more crucially, unenlightened. Interestingly as well, Satori translates back to enlightenment. And given the dynamic between the blue peas, bubble frogs and Satori, these names seem to fit a bit closer than the names given in the English translations. Caves, a feature not in Breath of the Wild, emerged due to the upheaval, opening the lands up for further exploration, with Maoi also appearing from seemingly nowhere. Masterworks suggests that both Maois and Blue Peas may well be the same thing, or at least share the same relationship to the Satori or Lord of the Mountain. The deity of Satori Mountain has long been speculated upon since its appearance within Breath of the Wild, with it taking on the form of a deer-like creature, only appearing when offerings are left under the cherry trees upon the mountain, and said speculation claiming that the Satori is a reincarnation of a sage who passed away in Hyrule's distant past. One theory suggests that spirits that reach enlightenment become the Satori, and those that fail in their ambitions become a Maoi. The Maoi exist within caves, clinging to walls and ceilings in their frog-like shape. When they receive a hit, they break their form, reverting back to their original form as a Blue Pea. It could have been that the upheaval caused a strong defensive reaction, or it could be that the environment on the surface changes the Blue Peas into Maoi, as now having found evidence of a burrow where Blue Peas seem to live happily within the depths, it could be that this is their origin point, and that any found on the surface may eventually morph into the Maoi. It could also be a reaction from the Blue Pea swallowing a bubble gem, a strange artifact that the Maoi swallowed at some point in time during their time on the surface. Though it's also proposed within this book that perhaps bubble gems are the result of Blue Peas swallowing too many rupees, and therefore their greed manifesting. Of course, bubble gems inside of the game form the basis of one of the largest side quests in Tears of the Kingdom. They are a crystalline object that are dropped by the Maoi when they're weakened, and serve no purpose other than to trade to Colton, who in return gives a series of rewards dependent on the total number of bubble gems that you have traded. Colton's story is interesting though, as he believes a host can become a Satori should they swallow enough of these gems, in turn reaching a stage of enlightenment. However, when he swallows every bubble gem from every Maoi in the game, he doesn't become a Satori, but rather a Blue Pea. So did Colton therefore not reach the enlightenment that he sought from swallowing the gems? This was a piece of lore that went wholly unanswered in the games, but Masterworks seems to have some answers, and poses a lot more questions with it. The book suggests that the Maoi revert back to a Blue Pea when they release the bubble gem, something that is seen in game, inferring that there is a possibility that bubble gems actually alter the bodies of those that ingest them, hence Blue Peas turning into Maoi. When you shoot a Blue Pea with an arrow in the game, they release a small amount of rupees, which may well have been swallowed by the Blue Pea. It's thought within Masterworks that the Maoi are created due to the greed of some Blue Peas, swallowing too many gems, almost like the bubble gem can tell those who have been virtuous from those who have not. This is a fun thought, that the Satori itself decides, as an arbiter of justice, what other creatures may join the ranks of the Satori as a legendary creature based on how good they have become, almost a take on reaching enlightenment and heaven within Buddhist beliefs. However, this could all be explained a lot simpler than this. Colton made a mistake with how to use the bubble gems, or that turning into a Satori was just not possible, at least not in his current body. Perhaps turning into a Blue Pea is the first step on the road to enlightenment for Satori, or perhaps it is indeed because Colton at this stage in his life has just not reached his own personal enlightenment. After all, according to Masterworks, it is thought that the Satori are sages that reach their own personal enlightenment, and it's also thought that the Maoi are the remnants of the sages that have failed to reach said enlightenment. Maybe as a result of this, Colton, as a non-sage character, a travelling store owner, could never actually reach the same level of enlightenment as a sage could, and therefore can never actually become a Satori. The final note in the book about the Satori is unfortunately steeped in sadness, as it states that after the events of Colton becoming a Blue Pea, his cart is moved to Satori Mountain by his brother Kilton, and was done so because Kilton believes that his brother may be one of the Bluepie that now lives there, upon the mountain. He hopes Colton is one of these, and that his brother can acquire spiritual training and one day become a sage, and therefore a Satori. And that's it. 7 facts about the Wilds era of Hyrule that you may or may not have known, based on information divulged to us via Masterworks. Thank you again, LivyXBobbyX, for your work on translating the book. Let me know in the comments below what facts you didn't know before watching this video. I'll see you next time. And if you're missing the sound of my voice while I work on the next video, head on over here and have some fun with me as we list off every crime committed by every Zelda princess ever.